Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about A Murder at the End of the World, Episode 7. It's Chapter 7, Retreat. So spoilers for the episode and spoilers for the series, because this is it. This is the finale, and we know who the killer is. Kind of. Well, I mean, we know who the killer's... Killer parenthesis S. That feels the most accurate way to say it. Yeah, I was actually really surprised that this was the shortest episode. I was surprised that last week's was pretty short compared to the first 5. But that's not unheard of. I remember the OA having like a short episode right before its finale and things like that. But to see that this one was even a little bit shorter, this was only just clocking in at about 40 minutes, I was like, okay, alright, well, let's see what they've got for us. Let's see how it wraps up. It wraps up, it starts concluding quite quickly. Like, immediately we're put into this situation. Last episode ended with Andy coming to get Lee and the others, and everyone who was at the compound is now in the bunker, in the house that's 50 feet down, or whatever it is. And it becomes some questioning about what's going on, some accusations being thrown around. Andy's upset with Lee, that Lee's going to leave him, so on, so on. Kind of corroborates some of the things that Lee had said last episode. Maybe not every little detail, but certainly the broad strokes of it. And what we end up getting is Darby realizing how the murders happened. To sum it up, Ray, the AI, and I joked, was it episode 1 or episode 2? I don't know, but it was early on. I joked that the AI could be behind it, and I was only being semi-serious, but it kind of would fit into the themes of trusting technology, wouldn't it? But it turns out that Ray is behind the murders, but it's a little bit more convoluted than that, and not in a sense that I'm saying it's convoluted writing. It is by design convoluted because there's not a clear party to blame. Ray was acting on things that Andy had said. Now, Andy had never ordered Ray, the AI, to kill anyone. He never said that. But he was giving, basically, therapy, or receiving therapy from Ray. He was using Ray as something to trust because he feels like he couldn't trust people, and that's something that's been set up in the show before. And Darby had previously done the same, where she talked to Ray to make herself feel better. And we hear him say how much he hates Bill, how jealous he is that Zoomer was immediately bonding with them within seconds of meeting him, despite all the effort and through the years that he's put in as a father, and says how he wishes he was dead, that he wants to break his legs, and some other things. So you have that, but then on the other side of it, you also have the fact that the physical perpetrator who did, actually acted out some of these murders is Zoomer. Unknowingly. Zoomer's not intentionally hurting anyone, but because Ray's controlling the game that he's playing in his augmented reality headset, and it ties back into him wanting to play doctor, he gave Bill a shot because he thought he needed it. He enacted the device that allowed Ray to control the pacemaker that killed Rohan. It turns out that Sean was actually just an accident because the system shut down, because Lou May was trying to hack into the system to call for her people to come get her, and that inadvertently led to Sean's death. So that one's a little bit separate, but the first two are very, very interesting, and Darby kind of gets at this in her narration at the end, because we kind of bookend the whole show with her reading the last chapter of her new book about this incident, about this story that we've had over the course of this show. And she says, there's all these legal knots being tied up, and no one can really decide who to thrust all the blame on. And that's something that's probably going to go on for a long time, to decide who's responsible for this. Because you have Andy, who built the AI, so is he responsible for that? He also said what he said, and then the AI interpreted it a certain way. And then this child acted out the actual crimes to a point, under the directions of the AI. It's this really weird, almost Russian dolls of perpetration, right? And who's most to blame in it, all of it? It's really murky, and it kind of feeds into some of the things that Bill was scared of. The idea that killers are just something that society produces, and here you have Andy has produced a killer, and not in like a traditional serial killer way. He's not, it's not some psychopath who's living in a dark basement who's obsessing over people and got weird fetishes and wants and gets off on hurting people. It's not that at all. It's an AI that is cold, it is calculated, and is just processing all of the information from its own creation and the world around it to deduce that this is what it should be doing. So he is literally a product of people. In fact, there's a conversation between the director character and the other woman whose name I can't remember, because these two are by far the characters who are given the least to do in this show. They're just kind of still there at the end. But they're talking about how the AI isn't like anything but a mirror. It's just feeding off all the information that exists, and all that information comes from humans. It comes from artists. The director talks about how, oh, I got it to read that thing back in like episode 2 or 3 about, read Harry Potter as if it was written by Ernest Hemingway. I think that was the example. And it, it churned, Ray churned it out and read this interpretation of it. And that's all it's doing. It's just regurgitating the things that humans have already done, which is kind of a critique in AI in general, even in the real world, right? It's just analyzing art that people created and trying to recreate it in some way. Whether it's intentional or not, this has recreated a killer. It's recreated the idea of that. But yeah, like these themes are huge, and the idea that the AI is in some way involved in the killings are definitely plays into the themes of the overall show. It definitely plays into the themes that Andy could be a horrible influence on his son. In fact, he's already kind of put him into a position where he's responsible for the harm of others, where he's responsible for the murder of others, including his biological father and another innocent man. So from a theme perspective, like all this tracks really well, and I enjoyed how it all kind of fed back into those ideas. I will say though that I wasn't sure how to feel when it all started unraveling. There's that moment where Darby looks over at Zoomer and starts piecing things together, and she's looking at the headset, and she's sort of, you can see the cogs are turning in her head. And I sort of thought, oh, I don't know how I feel about where this is going. This feels like it's going places, and it's such big, broad concepts that while the themes over the course of the past 6 episodes have kind of set us up for some of this, it's such a big idea that it almost feels like nothing could have completely set us up for it, except for maybe more time spent with Ray the AI, by making him more of a consistent character. Because I would say that, well, he has had these prominent scenes where he's been talking to Darby. It's not been in every episode, and certainly it doesn't feel like he's been a complete mainstay, necessarily. But, simple little answers to things like the reason why someone didn't show up on the camera at Bill's door is because the person who was at the door was too short to actually be in the camera's view, is a fun little, like, explanation. It's almost like they were like, every time they looked at that footage last episode, they were like, oh, someone scrubbed their identity, but they've not just cut the footage because that would be too obvious. They've altered it so that the time's still there. They're looking for all these all these technology ways that someone's done this, and the answer is not technology at all. It's just the simplest solution. The person is shorter than the camera. And that's it. Similarly, towards the end of the episode, when Lee and Darby go into the operating room, the core of the computer, and like all the computers that make up Ray, and they want to destroy it all. They want to kill the killer, so they can't do this again and put a stop to all this. I love that, again, they start by trying to do it with their technology know-how, with their hacker skills. They're like, oh, can we hack into this? Can we get into this password? Can we feed into this and maybe get this detail back? That'll, they do a lot of hacking speak. But the solution, funnily enough, and I loved how this played into that scene around the campfire from an episode or 2 ago when I said, oh, they're all this technology, but they're taking solace in fire, which is caveman technology. That's what happens here, is that the solution to this isn't to hack into it. It isn't to outthink the computer or outthink the person who made it. It's to just set fire to it. they turn a laptop. Yeah, not only did they use a fire, which is very symbolic in and of itself, the start of that fire, their Molotov cocktail, if you want to call it that, is a laptop. They use a laptop as the ignition that sets everything off. They're taking a piece of technology, something that is a very everyday computer, something that can represent that side of the world, AI and technology, and they use that as an expensive explosive, or not even an explosive, just a Molotov cocktail, and set fire to the room. And seemingly it works because Ray shuts up after a couple of lines. It's interesting, and I think it was important to the themes of the show that Ray never turns evil. Like, Ray's not like HAL 9000, where he's like, I know what's best for humans, I must eradicate you. It's not like that. Ray, in a way, is, I won't say innocent per se, but he doesn't really know what he's doing either, or understands the ramifications of it or the weight of it. He's just operating to serve his master, and his master is a master of one. It's only Andy. And of course, technology is used against Andy in this episode. Darby uses a deep fake voice thing to mimic his voice so that Ray will do something for her. And she does it right in front of him. So this is, again, an example of technology being used for something good. And, these are all playing into these themes that we've been talking about all series. One detail I really loved, actually, at the end of the episode is that when she's doing her book reading, I loved that all the other survivors, who aren't Lee and Zoomer, because Lee and Zoomer will obviously go for the boat. Darby just has to hope they made it, because she'll never see her again, unless something goes wrong. We see all the other survivors in the audience of the book reading clapping. Even David, who's been a prick most of this season, is like smiling and clapping because he's really happy with the book, which ends with sort of reiterating all the things that Bill was scared of, and Darby feels like in some way she's finished his story, and that his death is not went unanswered. You'll never forget his name now because he was an important part of this. And I thought the ending was, the final scenes were very good in how they bookended from the start of the show, and I thought that all came together very nicely. I will say, just going back to the initial, this is how it happened, there was definitely a part of me that was like, I was asking myself the question, is this satisfying? And the answer wasn't like an immediate no, like I hate this or anything like that. But at the same time, I was asking the question, is this satisfying, instead of feeling instantly satisfied. So I don't necessarily think that means that it's not good per se, but it certainly means that it's not something that just clicked instantly with me. It's definitely something that I was having to think about, and like, okay, do I like this ending based on everything that the show has set up? Do I like this based on everything? And I do wonder, some of my frustrations with some of the middle episodes where I wasn't as into the investigation part as much, I do wonder if in hindsight those parts are even a little bit even worse to me, just because it turns out there wasn't really something to investigate, because there wasn't really a killer running around in the traditional sense. So her like following people around, and then there was things to get answers to, don't get me wrong, but I do wonder if tightening that stuff up a little bit and maybe devoting a little bit more time to exploring Ray as an entity that's always there, that's always watching, would have been interesting. Because like I say, the show has been setting up the whole time of people creating killers. The idea that technology can be used by people in both good ways, but certainly in bad ways, and that sometimes the technology can just be like this sort of continuous, this extension of a cesspool that is the human race. It can be the bad code, the faulty programming. Because I do like that element of it, is that ultimately this comes back to a human at the end. Like, it's still Andy at the center, even if he didn't actively order a death or order a hit, if you will. It was still a human being expressing themselves that led to a kill. And I think that is very important, because it's not just technology in and of itself. There's definitely how we interact with it, how we use it, and maybe this idea of being so reliant on it that it is your therapist. Because if you go back to what Bill was saying earlier in the season about people who are slaves to their phones and their laptops and being on social media, and they need that. It's like a form of therapy in and of itself, of getting that dopamine, of feeling connected to things. And then you skip ahead to Andy, and he doesn't trust people anymore, but he trusts Ray, the AI. So he's using that as his therapist, literally in this case, where he's talking to him, expressing his feelings, and it's come round in bit him. And he does get threatened. He grabs Darby by the throat at one point, and then Lee comes out and hits him. There were some interesting comments in the last review, actually, about people who were thinking that Lee was lying and that there was more to it. And it doesn't seem to be the case based on this episode, but it was an interesting read, and it did get me thinking during this when Andy was saying all the bad things she was doing, like she would try to kidnap my son, she tried to do this, and Lee was being very quiet. I thought, oh, maybe they are going to go down a path here where she's also guilty of something. But it's kind of, I need to spoil something to compare it, but it feels like the inverse of another famous murder mystery. I won't say what it is, but there's a famous murder mystery story where the twist is that everyone is the murderer. That everyone, aside from the person investigating it, was involved in the crime. This kind of feels like almost like an inverse of that, where no one is like the killer directly. Obviously, there's a couple people that are, Zoomer and Andy are both like tied to the killer, but it's kind of an interesting thing where it's like, no, there's not been some masked man going around just stabbing people. We know David threatened Darby. He confesses to that this episode, and that's okay. That's fine. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting path to go down. And this idea that it's almost a phantom at that point, because there isn't just someone sneaking around you can catch in the act. But it does raise some questions. For example, does that mean that Ray was the one that tried to kill Darby in the pool? They never quite directly assess that. So that's curious. And I'm just like, I didn't even think about that when I was watching the episode, but now I am thinking about it. Because I was getting this kind of weird impression when they were unraveling all this that Ray's not directly a threat. Again, he's not like HAL 9000, where just because they're figuring this out, he starts like, shutting off the air and try to kill them because they're coming after him. Even when they're in the computer room and they're directly trying to harm his system, he's just kind of begging. He's not like actively doing things to fight it back per se. You'd almost say that Ray himself is kind of this, like, how Andy's built this bunker and he's built this outpost and this hotel and everything underneath to protect him and completely insulate him from the world above and completely cut him off from humanity because he wants it that way, because he sees that as safe. Ray, by extension, is also part of that armor. Ray has been built to protect Andy and his interests at all costs. And because there's no feelings there, and because he can't deduce the morally right or wrong from that, it leads to, again, this, because Ray is disconnected from actual people. Yeah, he's connected to the internet and he's seeing art, he's seeing things that people are writing and doing, but because he's disconnected from the rest of the world, he's not learning like the way that a child would learn right from wrong. In a sense that Andy talked about Ray being this child of two different computer systems, of a security system and an AI being put together, and Ray was what was born out of it. So if you consider him a life form that he was born, then you have to teach him morals. You have to teach him right from wrong. And this is like a theme that comes up a lot in science fiction when you're talking about robots and AI, and you're talking about, do they have souls? Can they feel empathy and things like that? And one of the things that comes up a lot is this idea of like teaching them right from wrong. Like they need a parent. They need someone to really actually understand these things and be there to show them and try and make them empathize with those ideas. So, like from a perspective of like talking about what all this means, like it is a very fascinating ending for sure. It's probably just not as satisfying as a murder mystery conclusion, but as a conclusion to where all these themes have been building, it's at least it's just interesting, and I'm enjoying thinking about it, and I was enjoying thinking about it as I was watching the episode. And some of the visuals, of course, were good again. That final shot of Lee out in the boat in the water looks stunning. Wherever they shot this, I think I saw a Finland credit at the end of the credits. I'd never really paid attention all the way to the end of the credits before, but I think there was like a Finland tax credit or something like that, which would maybe imply they were shooting some of this in Finland. But whether it was Finland, Iceland, or somewhere similar, like the visuals were were gorgeous whenever they were outside doing stuff on location, and that this final shot was no exception. And you see them going towards the boat, Rohan's boat, but you don't know for sure if it's Rohan's boat. You don't know for sure that it's all going to be okay. But the implication that the world's not heard from her, and like Andy's looking for her because he wants to sue the crap out of her for kidnapping, at least suggests that she has remained hidden, and that's the hope. The ending kind of implying that she does get to some form of safety. So yeah, and ultimately relying on people is what solved things. Because even though Darby and Bill in the backstory were relying on technology a lot, they were using Reddit, they were using these other things, it all hinged on other people also using them to help. It all came down to other human beings. So yeah, I mean, on those levels, I enjoyed the themes of the show a lot. I don't think it was quite as thought-provoking as the OA was. Like, I think that really kind of like sparked the creative thought process in my brain when I watched that. But I do like all the themes that this played with. I like the cast quite a bit for the most part. I like the visuals, the music, the overall vibe. Whenever this show was a character telling a story, and we'd see that story play out, usually Darby in her flashbacks, but some other examples like Lee, it was kind of at its best. That was when it was at its strongest and doing what it does. But yeah, I don't have much more to add. It was a shorter final episode, and it was kind of basic in terms of how it functioned. It was like the first half was very much deducing the crime. That took up most of the first chunk of the episode, and then it was about taking out Ray, and then the escape, and then we went into our kind of coda, if you will. But there was several sweet moments throughout, and yeah, it was very good. And if anything else, it all proves that Lee was right to be scared for Zoomer to be growing up under Andy, because he's already inadvertently turned him into a killer, even though you can't blame the kid, he didn't know what he was doing, but if that's not a giant red flag, then I don't know what is. So yeah, I guess that's me. I guess that's my thoughts on the Murder at the End of the World finale. So by all means, let me know what you thought of the episode and indeed the show as a whole in the comments. Please do like, subscribe, all that stuff helps me a bunch if you do. People find the channel and the show. But that is me, so thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?